Thank you, Monica. We really, really appreciate it. Great way to open. I'd like to acknowledge that where I'm broadcasting from in Colorado specifically, I'm on the region that is and was home to the Ute tribe. And as we move into our myriad of speakers for today's session, we have quite a few. I also want to take a moment to frame how all of today's speakers fit into the creation of the roadmap for the Central Grasslands. We've designed this speaker series, which includes today and speakers next Thursday and the following Thursday on the 16th and the 23rd, to complement the expertise and the knowledge base that all of the delegates who are listening in or who are on the panel today are bringing to the summit. And we want to hear firsthand about the experiences of those living and working on the Central Grasslands, about the science that is informing the challenges we're facing, and about the many, many incredible initiatives and solutions that are already happening on the grasslands. This ideally will help all of us gain a better understanding about what to prioritize in the roadmap as we move into those work groups on July 28th and August 5th. But without further musings from me, I want to introduce the founder and motivator for this entire project, Tammy from the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. Tammy, it's been more than inspiring to work with you on the summit, and I really want to thank you for bringing us all together and the opportunity to hear from you about where we're at and what we're up to and why we're here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. If anyone that knows me personally knows I'm technically challenged, so I thought that was the right way to start my presentation. I did want to thank Monica, Matt, and Alejandro for setting the stage and the spirit that we're here together for. So it's been quite a journey, a little emotional because it's been a long process to get here. So thank you, everyone. And as we kick this off, I really want to provide context. There's a lot of initiatives going on out there for grasslands, anywhere from the North American Bird Conservation Initiative to the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, to Partners in Fight, to the 3 Billion Birds science paper, to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, joint ventures, and just many of you on the call today and beyond. And this summit is really meant to complement these initiatives and get us working better together to save our grasslands. So we appreciate that you've all been on a journey and you're adapting as our world has changed, and we just look forward to charting the course forward as a collaborative, diverse community to conserve the people, places, water, wildlife, and heritage of our grassland landscapes. And I just really want to set the tone that we need to, these next few weeks, listen, share, be open to thinking differently about how we work, how we think, how we act. Let's be respectful. As they say, be a good owl, be a good listener. And obviously there's several partners and support that has made this journey possible. The presenting sponsors of the Knobloch Family Foundation and ConocoPhillips for their leadership investment that really helped put the meat on the bones, as well as several strategic conversations with so many partners. And just to name a few, including the Fish and Wildlife Service Region 6 office, Canadian Wildlife Service, Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture, Audubon Rockies, and so many others. And we've been very fortunate to get a lot of investment and support at the different levels, from platinum to gold to silver and scholarship. And this includes a wonderful mix of states, industry, foundations, and non-governmental organizations. And we have several partners that are also supporting, from the Fish and Wildlife Service to the Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, and Canadian Wildlife Service. And we have additional supporters that will be coming on, as we are very optimistic that we can all come together in person as a community next year. And obviously this was a team effort. That's the point. It takes a team to get us where we need to go. So we really wanted to be inclusive and diverse. We have 26 planning partners that have worked over the last year to help pull the summit together, representing 8 sectors, including non-government organizations, state, federal, academia, indigenous, industry, foundations, and private landowners. And also this represents 3 countries, the Canada, US, and Mexico. So thank you Also, we should really do a call out to Matt. He's been an amazing facilitator, very flexible, very adaptable, and very resilient as we've moved forward. So thank you, Matt, with Rocky Mountain Innovation Lab. So why are we here? What are we up to? As you're aware, grassland conservation is complicated. And if you think about from the soils to the water, to the wildlife, and to the human communities. And there's a lot of wonderful initiatives, organizations, and partners working on grassland conservation. But the reality is, in many cases, our efforts are going in different directions. Sometimes it's creating more noise. Our efforts are not adding up to make the cumulative impacts we need to do to change the direction that we're heading in our grasslands. And we're seeing some duplication and some overlapping efforts. So ultimately, what we really want to do is come together, get on the same page, and be more effective and efficient for our grasslands and our communities. And this is the World Wildlife Fund plow print map. And if you look at this, the bright green are our grasslands, the darker brown are the cultivated land, and then you see splatterings of yellow. Those are our urban and rural centers. And recognize that this landscape pattern is duplicative in Canada and Mexico. So just wanted to provide that sense of place and what the landscape looks like out there. And it is a working landscape, and it is very dynamic, ever changing. And it's a landscape that's producing grass for cattle production, crops for food and human consumption, energy, and it also supports human and wildlife communities. So as we think over these next several weeks, ultimately, how do we keep grass side up? How do we minimize conversion in a landscape that is predominantly privately owned and also honoring property rights? How do we grow crops with less inputs that support more biodiversity? How do we address depleted aquifers? We're also running out of water for agriculture, for wildlife, and for our human communities. And how do we ensure resiliency in a changing climate? We have policies that promote conservation in one area and conversion in others. So how do we address these conflicting pieces? And how do we support diverse communities and cultures? At the end of the day, it's a human-centered approach, and humans are going to lead the way to solutions. So there's many markers out there indicating that what we're doing is not sustainable. We're exceeding the capacity of the land. From not only the land, to the birds, to other wildlife, to aquifers, the system is stressed. And the indicators are clear. Many of you have heard of the state of the birds and the 3 billion birds lost. 1 in 4 of those 3 billion birds lost in the last 50 years are grassland birds. 750 million, and they call this area home. We're on average annually losing 2 million acres of grassland habitat. So many things are in decline, from our birds to our grassland acres, to our mammals, to our pollinators, to our native plants. And also our rural communities and our indigenous communities are suffering and having sustainability challenges. So the challenges are diverse. The reality is no one entity or organization can save our grasslands. It requires a collaborative movement. So how do we flock together better? And as we think over these next few weeks and work, what new approaches, innovative ideas are needed in science, policy, and partnerships? What's working that we need to do more of and have it scale up? And how do we make sure it's relevant at the community and local level? What isn't working and what should we just stop doing? How do we get a commitment across the sectors and countries to change the trajectory? And how do we move the roadmap into action once we develop it? And as you think about success, what success looks like by us flocking together is we have healthy wildlife, we save our water, aquifers, our grasslands, we soften the footprint like Monica was talking about, become more resilient for the changing landscape and climate ahead, and we ultimately save our natural and our cultural heritage. So as you dive in with us, think, work together, be open, be respectful, Embrace change and focus on solutions. And ultimately, we need to check our egos and our logos at the door. Let's get on the same page, headed in the same direction together. So let's set that course, a heading that gets us all oriented in the same direction, that same highway, with our efforts, instead of running over each other, merging together. Let's set the stage, get the steps, actions, and those measurable milestones out there, and let's hold ourselves accountable to setting the course and committing to it for at least the next 10 years. We have to commit through the work we do, for what we fund and invest in, to make it an achievable plan, and we all have to be ambassadors for it. So we're part of the landscape, critical part of the solution to saving the people, places, and natural resources we love. So thank you. I'm excited for the journey ahead.
Thank you, Tammy, for helping to set the context for this summit. I really appreciate your passion and energy and all the hard work you put into organizing this. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Arvind Panjabi, and I'm an avian conservation scientist here at Conservancy of the Rockies, where I've spent much of the last 15 years trying to better understand what's driving the decline of our grassland birds and taking steps to conserve them, especially in the Chihuahuan Desert of Mexico. I'd like to start off by addressing why birds matter and why we should all be concerned about the loss of birds from our grasslands and elsewhere. Birds, being among the most abundant, visible, and ecologically diverse and sensitive group of vertebrates on the planet, they are quite literally, if I can get my advance to work, they are quite literally the canaries in the coal mine. And they rapidly reflect changes to our environment through changes in their own abundance. And thus, they really are an early warning system, just like the canary that the miners would bring down into the mines, signaling danger in the broader ecosystem that is likely affecting other species as well, including humans. So, as go the grassland birds, so go the pronghorn, the bison, the swift fox, the grouse, the cattle, and eventually the people. So that's why it's so important that we address the decline of birds in our grasslands to better understand its causes and the potential solutions for the benefit of not just the birds, but all life.
Hey, Arvind, we are sorry to interrupt. We're getting a little, you're in presenter mode, so we can see all of your notes too, and not able to see the screen as much. I know we ran through this and figured it up here anyway.
How do I fix it? New share? Let's see. I did click the wrong screen. Thank you for letting me know.
Yep. Sorry to interrupt. There we go.
Okay. Now you can see all my secrets.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. So we'll start off a little bit overview of the Central Grasslands, a shared ecosystem that spans from Canada to Mexico, with many shared plants and animals, including resident and migratory birds, as well as species like pronghorn, bison, and prairie dogs, among many others that are found nowhere else in the world. So this map on the left here shows the overlap and distribution of grassland bird species that breed primarily in the Great Plains, highlighting the strong migratory connectivity of these birds with the Chihuahuan Desert region. In fact, over 85% of grassland-dependent bird species in this region migrate between the Great Plains and Chihuahuan Desert twice a year, spending as much as 8 to 9 months on their wintering grounds and places in between. The other 15% are either local resident bird species in a part of the Central Grasslands, or they migrate to the pampas grasslands of the southern cone of South America. And this is just a small number of species, but the vast majority stay almost entirely within this trinational Central Grasslands ecosystem. So you might notice that the extent of grasslands in the Chihuahuan Desert region is significantly less than in the Great Plains, and this is in fact correct. The estimated extent of grasslands in the Chihuahuan Desert is about 1/5 that of the Great Plains. So that means that migratory grassland birds coming from the Great Plains have to concentrate in a much smaller area and in much higher densities than they do in the Great Plains. And this has in fact also been corroborated by our surveys in the Chihuahuan Desert that often find areas of grasslands with more than 100 birds per hectare, or 40 grassland birds per acre, which is quite a high density. As many of you probably know, the grasslands are a product of our physical and biological environment, having been shaped through forces of nature over millions of years through the effects of climate as well as fire, which is now mostly limited to prescribed fire, although not entirely. It's also been shaped by the animals that live here, especially the grazers, which historically were bison and other large herbivores, but today have largely been replaced by cattle. Smaller herbivores, such as the prairie dog, are also noteworthy as their role as keystone species, creating unique conditions that are preferred by birds like mountain plovers, burrowing owls, McCown's longspurs, as well as other animals. Grazers literally are the ecosystem engineers in the grasslands that create the vegetation composition and structure that birds and other wildlife depend on. Here you can see how these bison are literally creating the spaces between the grass that the birds need to move about and find food in the grasslands. This graphic from Knopf and colleagues illustrates how different grassland birds require different vegetation structure that's influenced by grazers, such as bison and cattle. And you can see that the highest diversity of birds is found in this area here in the middle, with relatively heavy to moderate grazing. And without grazing, many grassland birds simply would not exist in the grassland. However, as we know, the Great Plains grasslands have been greatly reduced, fragmented, and degraded over time, starting as far back as the 1800s, through the conversion of grasslands to farmlands, as well as overgrazing that's led to the loss of grass cover, shrub encroachment, and the desertification of grasslands, rendering them nearly useless for both wildlife, cattle, and people. These effects have continued to grow over time and have been exacerbated by other changes, including installation of extensive power lines, pipelines, widespread energy development in remote areas, all of which create significant surface disruption, leading to the spread of invasive species like cheatgrass that can negatively affect birds and other animals living in these areas. Of all these, the conversion to cropland as well as shrub encroachment are likely two of the most important contributors to grassland bird loss. In fact, here are the numbers. Thanks to a recent analysis by Comer et al., you can see that cumulatively we've lost 98% of the tall grass prairie, 76% of the mixed grass prairie, and nearly half of the shortgrass prairie. And as Tammy mentioned, and according to the latest Plowprint report by World Wildlife Fund, we've lost 1.7 million acres of grassland in the US and Canada just in 2017, which is a slight drop from previous years, but hardly an encouraging number. In the Chihuahuan Desert in northern Mexico, the extent of grassland loss is completely unknown. The only estimates of loss available are from a recent study by Poole et al. For the Valles Centrales region of Chihuahua, where they discovered that 175,000 acres of new croplands were created over 5 years, largely at the expense of native grasslands. Through our monitoring efforts in this region, we've demonstrated that the Valles Centrales region supports a significant proportion of the global population of birds like chestnut-collared longspurs, Sprague's pipits, and several other of our most steeply declining grassland birds. So what's been the impact of all this change over the decades? Well, in 2019, I was part of a group of scientists that published an analysis in Science documenting the net change in breeding bird abundance in the US and Canada since 1970. The findings were staggering, indicating that we had lost nearly 3 billion birds from our environment across all biomes, equaling nearly a total third decline in total bird abundance, just within our lifetimes. And fully 50% of the 529 bird species that we analyzed showed significant population declines. Grassland birds have been particularly hard hit relative to birds in other biomes, showing a total 53% loss of abundance, equaling 720 million birds lost. So roughly out of those 3 billion birds that we've lost continent-wide, 1 out of every 4 of those was a grassland bird. And fully 75% of grassland bird species are showing significant population declines. On the bright side, wetlands are showing modest gains of about 20 million birds, a testament to what we can do when we pass legislation and to protect our environment and invest in conservation programs. Unfortunately, the news is even worse for grassland birds that overwinter in the Chihuahuan Desert. as they've declined at twice the rate of other grassland birds, having lost roughly 70% of their population since 1970, compared to roughly 35% for other grassland birds. And the numbers of birds lost are staggering, from 16 million chestnut-collared longspurs to 182 million horned larks. We have a long way to go to try to recover these populations. In addition to the shrub encroachment, another major reason for the loss of grassland birds that's been well documented since at least the 1860s is the increasing encroachment of woody shrubs into the central grasslands, especially in the Chihuahuan Desert and southern Great Plains. However, the extent to which that occurred, both historically and recently, has not been well documented due to the lack of historical data and the difficulty in discerning shrubs in remote sensed imagery. However, it's clear from our survey work in the region that the vast majority of grasslands in the Chihuahuan Desert have experienced considerable encroachment of woody shrubs like mesquite and juniper, among others, and that this is largely the result of management or the lack thereof. In addition, recent research by Bird Conservancy and others suggests that woody shrub encroachment into grasslands reduces overwinter survival of birds in these areas. Now, why is this? Well, as shrubs get established in the grasslands and reach a certain height, they begin to attract predatory birds, like shrikes, that are not otherwise found in open grasslands. Thus, the shrub encroachment at a large scale can tip the balance between predator and prey in these environments, leading to lower overwinter survival in the Chihuahuan Desert. Thus, because of the scale at which shrub encroachment is occurring in the desert grasslands, it could be a major contributing factor to limiting grassland bird populations. So, can we bring them back, and how? Well, we shouldn't stop what we're doing. We should continue to and expand conservation efforts focused on known or suspected causes of decline, especially those with strong scientific evidence. But it shouldn't necessarily be business as usual. We need to be more strategic, more targeted in our efforts to the highest priority species and needs. We need to incorporate monitoring and evaluation to document our outcomes and inform the next steps. And we need to repeat and expand to scale up. We also need to focus on restoration. And we know we cannot return most of the lost grasslands that have been converted to farmlands back into grasslands, but where we can, we need to take those opportunities. And one program I want to highlight is the Conservation Reserve Program. We've recently been doing some analyses of data that have shown that CRP, as it's known, is very effective at recovering a large proportion of the grassland biodiversity in highly fragmented landscapes. Now, another action that we can take is to reverse shrub encroachment. Given the massive extent of this in the Chihuahuan Desert, we need to begin to address this more than the century of gradual change that's continuing today. And it is possible to do. As you can see from some of our work in Chihuahua, it's possible to turn a shrub-infested grassland like this one through mechanical shrub removal into a more natural grassland that can accommodate and help the survival of several of our most steeply declining grassland birds. Finally, I also want to emphasize the need to identify the leading causes of population decline for each species of birds, the smoking guns, if you will. These are not necessarily going to be the same for each species. But what we need to do is identify where in the life cycle can we best achieve population growth. Where are we losing birds? And the one way to do this is through integrated population models, and that combine demographic information as well as information on abundance and external factors such as habitat loss and management effects that can help us identify limiting factors and ways to alleviate them. This is exactly what the Partners in Flight, Bring Back 3 Billion Birds, and Road to Recovery initiatives are aiming to do, and they've identified 4 central grassland species as among those with the greatest urgency for conservation. This is based on an analysis of expected half-life of these birds. That's to say that how long will it be before we lose another 50% of the current populations of these birds. And for some species like Sprague's pipits, it could be as little as 12 years before we lose another 50% of this population. For birds like chestnut-collared longspur, it's only 20 years. And mountain plover, 27 years. Barred sparrow, 38 years. These are relatively short time frames within which we need to make a difference for these birds and turn their trajectory around. And that's what this Grassland Summit is all about: increasing our collaboration, our synergy, scaling up our efforts, and increasing our strategic investment in both science and conservation. So before I go, I just want to leave you with that last thought of that birds really are the indicators of the environment, and bird population declines are signaling major problems, especially in grasslands and farmlands. And a healthy home for birds really is a healthy home for all of us. It's up to us to be a voice for change, and I wish you all the greatest success and encouragement in making a difference for grasslands as we come together here to create the Central Grasslands Roadmap. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Amanda Haverland. I work for ABC and Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture. And I'm going to be talking about an international assessment of state-level grassland conservation programs, also referred to as the Grassland Conservation Gap Analysis. So a little bit of background info. In 2016, the Grassland Work Group was formed by the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Bird Conservation Committee. And this work group came up with the idea to conduct a state-by-state gap analysis in order to map tri-national grassland habitat programs and bird conservation efforts across North America. So the goal of this gap analysis is to develop a snapshot of current programs that are collectively addressing grassland management and restoration, as well as declines in the broad suite of grassland species. So our work will hopefully help to determine where collaboration efforts and funding are needed. So to get things started, the work group put together a 10-question survey that is geared towards collecting specific information about grassland program types, conservation targets, funding sources, partners, and then a few other things. This survey is web-based, and it has already been sent out via an email link to many would-be participants. And the instructions that we sent along with the link explain that the main interest in terms of programs are targeted state, national, federal, or NGO programs that address grassland habitats, primarily on private lands, but efforts that address monarchs, pollinators, birds, and other grassland associated species are also of interest. And then at the end of the survey, there is a request for the participants to click a link that takes them to this online interactive map you see a screenshot of right here. And we ask that they draw polygons around program locations or focal areas. And I'll get back to this map in just a little bit. So to get started with this project, I had to find the right people to reach out to. And I was basically starting from scratch. We wanted to target folks from state fish and wildlife agencies, as well as farm bill coordinators and folks at federal agencies and NGOs. So I ended up doing just a ton of Googling. And somewhat of a side note, I found that most of the state wildlife agencies in the Central Flyway had web pages dedicated to landowner programs. However, finding these pages wasn't always easy, especially by way of the navigation menus on each site. So finding a contact person was even more challenging because they weren't always listed. So I think the take home here is that state agencies may want to check to make sure these pages are easy to find. However, I understand it's likely that the information challenges that I observed on these websites are out of the control of managers to change due to website policies and procedures. So over the course of a couple of months, I sent out 240 emails to over 90 entities and inviting them to take this survey and to contribute spatial data. And so all 10 state agencies in the Central Flyway have responded, as well as 2 Canadian provinces. And there was a good response from the Mississippi Flyway as well. And response rates from the Atlantic and Pacific Flyways are a bit low, but I will eventually follow up and nudge those folks in those regions to fill in the blanks. And we haven't sent this survey to the contacts in Mexico yet, but that is currently in the works. So here are just some of the current results from specific questions, and this is just for the Central Flyway. So the majority of grassland conservation programs are federal, followed by state/provincial, and then federal and state partnerships tied for third place with NGO programs. And for over 50% of the programs in the Central Flyway, birds are listed as the main conservation target. And then habitat was the second highest proportion, followed by roughly equal proportions among the other categories. And so I think the take home here is that the majority of the grassland conservation programs are probably better classified as wildlife programs. And about a quarter of the programs do not have any monitoring associated with their conservation practices, or it could have been that the survey participant didn't know if there was, but the majority of programs do have some sort of habitat or wildlife monitoring in place. And some monitoring is likely actually compliance, which is a little bit different animal that we may want to explore at a later date. So top funding sources are split about equally between state/province and Farm Bill funding. And then in third place, which is other, which represents things that were only listed once, some examples being landowner groups, endowment income, lease revenue, or just one specific partner. And as I mentioned earlier, the other part of the gap analysis was this interactive online map to which we asked the participants to contribute data. And so far, 202 programs or projects have been entered into the map. 63 of those are in the Central Flyway, which you can see delineated here. And there are quite a few more in the Mississippi Flyway. However, there are 4 more states there in that region, meaning more opportunities for state programs. And plus 2 of the states there ended up entering a number of grassland conservation areas that really upped the numbers. So let's take a closer look at this online map. I'm going to navigate to that real quick. All right, so here is the website that's dedicated just to this project, and I'm going to click the map tab. And it loads. Okay, so it's pretty simple. So a participant that wanted to draw some data on here could just zoom into their region. You can actually toggle layers on and off. So I'm going to turn off this flyway for a second and then turn on counties. So all they would do is click this edit button and then select the target.
We can't see your navigation.
Oh, what can you see?
Still see your slide.
Oh, really? Maybe I have to exit my PowerPoint.
Yeah, I believe so. I think you have to reshare, get into that, and then reshare your screen.
Oh, I didn't. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me new share. Now do you see it?
Yes.
Hooray. Okay. Where was it? Okay, so let me start over. So here's the map that is on this website that's dedicated to this project. And there's different layers you can toggle on. So here you can see the flyways. So I'm just kind of focusing on Central right now. And I'm going to turn that off again and zoom back in. I can turn on the counties there. And so if I was going to enter data, I'd click this edit button. Let's say songbirds are the target for the program. And basically all participants have to do is click to draw a polygon. And then you can enter simple information about the project. Oops. Yeah, so I'm going to delete that. So as you can see, the Central Flyway, sorry, it takes a second to load. is pretty well filled in. Let me turn the, however, different states and provinces entered their data on different scales. And really, this is just the beginning, and we want to build off of this and see where we can take it and see maybe we can link some of the programs and improve upon what we've got going here. So really, I would like anybody who is listening to this that thinks that they can contribute data or would like to look closely at this map and see if something's missing for their state or region to please get in contact with me, and I will send you the link to this map, or hopefully we can actually put it on the website and my email as well. Let's see if I can pull up my presentation again so you can get my email address really quick.
Yeah, and this will be posted on the resource page on the website. A lot of the delegates have been headed over there to look at a number of the other resources, but this will all be on there, as well as your speaker piece and contact information, so people can get in touch with you there. So.
Awesome. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
And yeah, as I was saying, that will be on the resource page of the website if you have not gone over there yet. And if Amanda, if you click off of your shared screen, we can bring Jim up to give us a nice overview of scale and how we're approaching this roadmap at scale. Thank you both.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Amanda. See if I can, okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about scale and what it represents with this idea of a roadmap. And I thought I would start off with the first conservation roadmap that was made by Aldo Leopold. The report on the game survey for the North Central states in 1931, and this is a literal roadmap that he created showing his route when he went out to survey for wildlife. So we're building off the idea of this kind of roadmap, and that's the trail that he traveled in 1931. Imagine the cars he was using. Oh, and I just want to mention, my name is Jim Giocomo. I'm the Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture Coordinator for American Bird Conservancy, located here in Round Rock, Texas. So back to talking about scale and the Central Grasslands roadmap. When I talk about scale, working in a joint venture that is located in central Texas and Oklahoma, I'm thinking about 60 million acres at a time, and trying to take continental plans down to regional levels and then do local actions. So you can talk about scale from continent and country to ecoregion, province and state and county level, down to individual farms and ranches, and then fields within those ranches, and then even down to individual nest sites for wildlife species that could be a couple inches or a couple of centimeters where they pick a site. So all of those scales are important, but we think for this roadmap, we kind of want to stay in the middle of those scales in the ecoregion, the state to county level, and then bring it, take those pieces and bring it down to the local level. So when we're thinking, we want to think kind of middle of the road of this region, and I'll talk a little bit more about the region. And the amount of space that we talk about, the amount of land area we talk about, also influences the amount of time that it will take for certain practices to evolve. So we got to be patient when we start thinking bigger. And so we're talking about central grasslands, and central grasslands basically are the grasslands that are in the administrative central flyway that we've been talking about a little bit in the previous talks. And then grasslands, as Arvind showed, there's lots of different kinds of grasslands. Grassland could mean grassy areas, could mean prairies, short and mixed and tall grass prairies, could mean savannas, grassy areas with trees, or shrub grasslands or desert grasslands. In our survey that Amanda just talked about, we did not define what grassland meant. We let each state define, or each state and province define what grasslands mean, because depending on where you're standing, your grasslands may look very different. So we got to keep that in mind from north to south and east to west. Different grasslands mean different things to different people, and we're not all wrong. So the Central Grasslands includes basically 3 provinces in Canada, 10 states in the United States, and then at least 8 states in Mexico, or pieces of all of those states. So north to south, it's about 3,500 kilometers, or a little over 2,000 miles, and it would take you 35 hours to drive north to south or south to north. East to west, it's about 550 miles across. So it's a huge area. And it includes the Great Plains that we've talked about a little bit, and the Chihuahuan Desert, and probably a bunch of other areas. So we're talking about 1.3 million square kilometers, plus another almost 400,000 square kilometers, a total area of 1.7 million kilometers. And just the Great Plains alone, the map that you see there is 50 different published maps of the Great Plains on top of one another. So the boundaries are kind of fuzzy. The area is kind of hard to define, but generally what we're talking about is for the Great Plains, this area here, and then for the Central Grasslands, same concept. It's pretty fuzzy. So add in the Chihuahuan Desert, and you're looking at that 1.7 million kilometers, or 420 million acres. So it's about 1,000 times the largest city in North America, Mexico City. Or because I'm in Texas, we measure everything in Texas's. It's about 5.5 times the size of Texas. But of course, Canada's much larger, so it's 2 times Saskatchewan. And we're not just talking about a lot of people in this area. There's a lot of cattle, and almost works out that in the United States and Canada, the portions, it's about 1-to-1 for cattle to people in these states, in provinces in this region. So a lot of people, a lot of cattle, about 50 million people. Add in the Mexico portion, and you're talking about another 27 million people. And I couldn't find state by state numbers for cattle, but there's about 16 million. So almost a 2 people to 1 cattle ratio for that area. But again, a lot of people, a lot of cattle, and a lot of, as mentioned earlier in the talks, in the very beginning, a lot of tribal and indigenous nations represented in the region. So we're talking very big areas, very different things happening. 8 joint ventures, bird habitat joint ventures, encompass this area, and are working together as partnerships to move forward some of this grassland effort. So unprecedented partnerships of 8 joint venture working together. And then a lot of this area, as Arvind was talking about, is defined by the birds. You can see in this Lark Bunting does probably the best job of representing the geography that we're talking about for the Central Grasslands. You can see as it moves from its wintering areas to its breeding areas, there's about 12 million Lark Buntings globally, and almost all of them are in this Central Grasslands area. And they're not the only species like that. As Arvind mentioned, there's a lot of species that 100% of their population basically is in this Great Plains area, including the 5 species listed on the top there: the Cowan's longspurred, sprague pipit, Baird sparrow, chestnut-colored longspurred Lark Bunting. There's also species that are North America wide, but 2/3 of their population are within our Central Grasslands area, like grasshopper sparrow and loggerhead shrike. And then there's resident birds, where 100% of their life is spent, they don't migrate, so they're in the areas where they breed the whole year round, and 100% of their populations, or a huge portion of their populations, are within this Great Plains area. The idea of this talk was to kind of give an idea of how big of an area we're talking about and how much we can talk about it. So we chose the word roadmap specifically because it's a plan that doesn't have a lot of the on the ground details, and we shouldn't expect that right away. but we can see major landmarks and we can see connections. And if we zoom in a little bit on that route right there, we can identify areas where things are working well and identify areas where things need a little work, like these construction sites on this highway. And hopefully that's what we're going to get to in this roadmap, is having an idea of connections, an idea of collaborations, an idea of where the major pieces are, and then can take those to smaller scales and start working together at the state and local level to implement some of the big ideas. So the idea is we're thinking globally and acting locally, but the plan for our roadmap is somewhere in the middle of that globally and locally act. That's all I have for that.